When people enter into romantic relationships, especially at a young age, it can be difficult to discern a partner's true nature behind a mask of kindness and care. Everything may seem sincere, but reality often turns out to be quite different. To paraphrase a well-known saying, sometimes the path from conceiving a child to committing a brutal murder is just one step. Amanda Mongas was a friendly, sociable girl who easily made friends from a young age. She was always cheerful and welcoming in her interactions, yet she remained cautious and selective when it came to forming her closest circle of friends. The girl was born and raised in the small town of Delta, Ohio, with a population barely reaching 3,000 people. Amanda was most interested in the humanities. She adored children, so even in elementary school, she decided to become a preschool or school teacher. Getting a quality education was one of Amanda's priorities, as she aspired to achieve financial independence and stability in the future. That's why she planned to graduate from college and find a good job first, and only then think about starting her own family. But life made its own adjustments to these idealistic plans. The girl's parents couldn't maintain family harmony, constant quarrels and misunderstandings led to divorce. At the time, Amanda was 13, and she chose to stay with her father. The man soon remarried a woman named Deborah, and the three of them lived happily together. Amanda's closest friend among all her acquaintances was a boy named James Remy, whom she had been friends with since kindergarten. They grew up together, went to the same school, and were inseparable. One summer, while working together, Amanda grew even closer to James, whom everyone knew as a witty and charming young man. Gradually, their friendship turned into more tender and romantic feelings, and the young couple started dating. After graduating from high school, their relationship became even more serious. As soon as Amanda found a part-time job, she decided to move in with James and settle in his apartment. The girl managed to get a job in the kitchen of a local restaurant, where she could combine part-time work with her studies. Despite Amanda's ardent feelings, when she introduced James to her family as her boyfriend, they didn't show much enthusiasm. They didn't take to him right away, and even the girl's stepmother expressed some reservations about the relationship. However, Amanda was steadfast in her love and dismissed all concerns as excessive and unfounded. She was confident that she could handle her own affairs better, while her elders looked at the situation more soberly. The young man's odd behavior didn't stop Amanda from continuing to build a serious relationship with him despite her young age. After living together, the boy's behavior changed dramatically for the worse. He began to control Amanda more and more, accusing her of jealousy and infidelity. It all turned into prolonged moral pressure on the girl. The worst fears of her loved ones, which they had warned her about, began to come true. Unfortunately, due to her inexperience, Amanda didn't immediately realize the toxicity of their relationship. Soon she wanted to break up, as James turned out to be too controlling and manipulative, but she was afraid to do so. He believed he had the right to dictate every aspect of her life, from her social circle to her wardrobe. As soon as Amanda would leave the house, even to go to the store, within minutes the phone would be ringing off the hook with his calls. The boyfriend was literally jealous of every lamppost. And the situation only worsened when the girl became pregnant. At first, James reacted neutrally, but over time his dissatisfaction grew, as his beloved was paying less attention to him. Amanda refused to terminate the pregnancy at his request, deciding to become a mother. Of course, this required preparation and took a lot of time and effort. Naturally, this affected the couple's relationship, as the girl had to divide her attention, previously fully focused on James, to care for the future baby. Her boyfriend continued to insist that he didn't want this child and that she should get rid of it, but Amanda stood her ground. On May 21, 2016, a boy was born. By that time, Amanda's friendships had almost come to naught due to the tense relationship with James. The whole time Amanda was in the hospital, James was there, which significantly limited her communication with relatives. Unfortunately, the boyfriend and the girl's parents did not get along at all, barely restraining their mutual dislike. Every meeting turned into an argument. It seemed that the young man deliberately prevented Amanda from seeing her loved ones, which fit into his manipulative behavior pattern. Because of this, Amanda's father and stepmother were never able to visit their grandson in the hospital. The boy's grandmother and grandfather saw him for the first time when he was already 3 months old. All this time, Amanda could only send them photos of the child and correspond through messengers. Over time, James became even harsher and more manipulative. Any little thing could set him off. Every problem was immediately blown out of proportion. He especially enjoyed accusing Amanda of infidelity, constantly claiming that the child was not really his. Such behavior greatly upset the girl. She tried her best to resist it. But Amanda had to fight not only with James, but also with postpartum depression and hormonal fluctuations, which are inevitable companions of many young mothers. The situation only worsened. The climax was when James not only verbally attacked her, but put a knife to the girl's throat, threatening to kill her. Despite this horrific incident, Amanda still cherished the hope of keeping the family together for the sake of her son and tried to stay positive. She believed that the boy's aggression was solely due to the changes that the birth of the child had brought into their lives. The young mother did not tell her relatives about this incident, but shared her experiences with a few close friends. James' manipulative behavior had so intimidated Amanda that she was afraid to turn to her family for help. Unfortunately, this often happens in such situations. Even the girl's closest friends understood that what was happening in her life was not normal. With the appearance of the child, the danger of the situation only increased, because now not only Amanda's life was at risk, but also her son's. Everyone unanimously advised the girl to break up with her problematic boyfriend. And finally, Amanda seriously considered taking this step. Making such a decision was extremely difficult. She well remembered how loving, caring, and tender James had been at the beginning of their romance, how many years they had been best friends. Amanda hoped that all this was temporary, that they both needed time to adapt to the new circumstances. That's why she forgave the young man for all the insults and even displays of physical again and again. But this could not go on forever. One evening, after another quarrel, the young couple decided to go to a bar to drink, have fun, and discuss what had happened. So that someone could look after the baby at this time, Amanda's mother came to visit them. The woman thought that she would have to sit with her grandson for only a few hours, but more than 3 had already passed, and neither her daughter nor James had returned home yet. Later it turned out that the young man had overdone it with alcohol that evening. Amanda, on the other hand, did not drink, so she got behind the wheel herself to drive them home. But just a couple of blocks from the bar, James began to insist that she let him take the driver's seat. At first the girl refused, but the young man got angry, so Amanda gave in to avoid another conflict. Unfortunately, this decision proved fatal. Although the young people were buckled up, a few hundred meters later, James crashed into a parked car at full speed. The passengers were thrown up in their seats from the heavy impact. James got off with a slight fright, while Amanda hit her head hard on the windshield, which shattered into pieces. Her face was cut by the shards. And although the young man's guilt in what happened was obvious, he immediately began to blame Amanda for the accident. The girl, on the other hand, was in no mood to sort things out now. She was trying to stop the bleeding and was terribly afraid that she might have suffered some serious injuries. But James seemed to have completely lost control of himself. Instead of calling an ambulance, he began to yell at the girl. Verbal abuse very quickly escalated into physical violence. The young man brutally beat the wounded Amanda. After this incident, Amanda Mongas finally realized that James had no warm feelings for her. That he was cruel and dangerous, and she should have stayed as far away from him as possible from the very beginning. The first thing the girl did was file a police report, and then she deleted the young man from all her contacts. Immediately after that, she called her father and asked him to take her and the child home. Thus, the Mongas family was finally reunited. Amanda obtained a restraining order against James and hoped that she and her son were now safe. The young man really did not appear on the horizon for some time. But no one suspected that the most terrible trials and dangers were yet to come. Having returned to her parents' home, Amanda began to live under the same roof with her parents again, as before. The girl wanted to start a new life, to forget about all those unhealthy relationships, to erase from her memory the painful period associated with James. She found a job in the same restaurant as before, but now as a waitress. It was the same establishment that was often visited by the residents of their small town, many of whom Amanda knew well. She resumed communication with the residents of Delta, met new people, made friends. The girl had always been very sociable and open, so all the visitors of the restaurant quickly grew fond of her. Things were going well, the bitterness of the suffered grievances was slowly receding. Amanda earned a decent income for her age and could provide for herself and her child. So the girl began to look for an apartment to move out from her parents and live separately. Despite the wonderful relationship with her family, she simply lacked space for a full life with her son. Once at work, Amanda met a young man named Curtis. They often crossed paths back in their school years, but hardly communicated then. Now the girl had the opportunity to get to know him better and realized that he was a very pleasant and interesting person. A warm relationship developed between them. Curtis became a reliable support for Amanda, he supported her in everything and helped a lot. Soon the friendship grew into romantic feelings, the young people felt a growing attachment to each other with each passing day. The young man sincerely fell in love with Amanda's son from her previous relationship, often saying that he treated the baby as his own. And Amanda saw that his words were not at odds with his actions. Finally, on March 13, 2017, the heroine of this story decided to publicly announce her relationship with Curtis. She did not even suspect how much would change in her life after this act and what terrible trials awaited her ahead. With one click, Amanda changed her status on social networks from unmarried to in a relationship. At the same time, the girl immediately indicated that she was serious. That same day, Curtis moved in with his beloved. From now on, they lived as one family, Amanda, her son, Curtis, the girl's father, and her stepmother. The young couple planned to find a separate apartment as soon as possible in order to start a full-fledged family life. On the evening of Tuesday, March 14, 2017, Curtis got up very early, he had to go to work before 5 a.m. When Curtis left for work, the only adults left in the house were Amanda, who was still asleep, and her stepmother Deborah. The 10-month-old boy was peacefully snuffling in his crib. Suddenly, around 5:30 in the morning, Deborah was awakened by a loud sound, similar to a gunshot or the sound of something large shattering. Opening her eyes, the woman could not understand what it was. Worried, she decided to get out of bed and check what had happened. Calling out to Amanda by name and not hearing an answer, Deborah caught some suspicious noise. A moment later, quick footsteps sounded, someone was approaching her room. The woman suspected something was wrong, it seemed like a stranger had broken into the house. Trying to protect herself from the attack, Deborah locked the bedroom door from the inside and pressed herself against it to prevent the intruder from entering. But without thinking twice, he simply shot the lock, grazing the woman's hand in the process. Fortunately, Deborah miraculously avoided serious injury, the bullet only scratched her thumb. But now the door could no longer serve as a barrier to the attacker. Kicking it in, a masked man armed with a pistol burst into the room. He looked nervous and confused, looking around every now and then as if expecting an attack. Glancing at Deborah, the stranger asked where Curtis was. Obviously, he was looking for Amanda's boyfriend, and seeing a startled woman in pajamas instead, he was a little confused. Deborah replied that Curtis had left for work half an hour ago. These words made the intruder even angrier. Gritting his teeth, he confessed that he had just shot Amanda, and threatened to kill anyone who got in his way without hesitation. So he ordered Deborah to obey. Then the attacker forced the woman to take her cell phone and demanded that she give him the baby. Despite Deborah's pleas, he silently and menacingly cocked the pistol. Realizing the futility of any resistance, the frightened woman took the child out of the crib, but did not give the baby to the stranger. Telling the man that she would not leave the boy, she also handed him Amanda's phone when he demanded it. After that, the attacker put the barrel of the pistol to the back of Deborah's head and ordered her to leave the house. At the same time, he did not even allow her to change clothes. Despite the rather cold weather, the woman found herself on the street barefoot, in nothing but her pajamas. He pushed Deborah into the car, and then took off his mask, allowing the kidnapping victim to recognize him. It turned out to be none other than James. The young man explained to the hostage that he needed her as an he was going to flee the city, taking the child with him, and use the woman as a human shield. Threatening with a weapon, James demanded that Deborah show him the safest escape route to avoid encountering police patrols. When they had driven a few hundred meters from the house, the kidnapper suddenly ordered the woman to call an ambulance. Allegedly, the wounded Amanda was left in the house and could still be saved. The attacker insisted that Deborah urgently call the medics. With trembling hands, the woman dialed 911 and told the dispatcher that there was an injured girl in the house who needed immediate help. She barely had time to give the address when the operator began asking for details of the incident. James snatched the phone and cut off the call. The police arrived at the scene within minutes. The patrol officers were the first to arrive at the house. They immediately noticed that the front door was not locked. Once inside, one of the officers heard an alarming moan. Following the sound, the police found themselves in Amanda's room. The young mother was lying in bed, covered in blood, but still showing signs of life. At first, the cops assumed it was a suicide attempt. They asked the girl where the gun she had shot herself with was. Deciding that Amanda might act inappropriately, the police wanted to protect themselves and her from another shot. But the girl assured them that she did not know where the pistol was, and looking around, the officers did not see it anywhere nearby either. It became clear that someone else had shot Amanda. Gathering her last strength, the girl asked where her child was. One of the policemen noticed an empty baby crib in the room. When asked who had taken her son, Amanda barely uttered, "James. Remy." And then she lost consciousness. Despite all the efforts of the paramedics who arrived at the scene, the young mother's life could not be saved. The injury was too serious. Amanda was balancing on the brink of life and death. She was rushed to the hospital, but a few hours later, at the age of 23, she died there without regaining consciousness. All this time, Curtis and the girl's father were at work, not even suspecting the tragedy unfolding in their home. Deborah was still being held hostage and could not inform anyone about what had happened. So neither the young man nor the father had any idea what terrible events were taking place within the walls of their home. The police also did not have complete information, but they managed to find out that, most likely, both Deborah and the 10-month-old baby were in the hands of an armed and extremely dangerous criminal. Law enforcement officers immediately issued an interception plan to warn local residents about the threat and find and detain the kidnapper as soon as possible. While the police were deploying a search operation, James, tightly clutching the baby, was racing in a car as far away from the city as possible. Deborah was sitting in the passenger seat, trembling with fear. The attacker was eager to get to the airport as soon as possible and repeatedly threatened the woman, demanding that she help him with this. He was extremely nervous and agitated, his eyes darting about and his hands shaking with the weapon. On the way, they came across a railroad crossing. The barrier was already lowering, and the whistle of an approaching train could be heard in the distance. But James, blinded by desperation and fear, did not even think of braking. He pressed the gas pedal with all his might, hoping to make it through. Unfortunately, he did not take into account that the rails were raised quite high. The car crashed into them at full speed, and something in the undercarriage immediately broke. Although the car managed to jump the track a moment before the train rushed past, the impact was so strong that James lost control. Ramming the barrier on the other side, the battered car stopped a few dozen meters from the crossing. The engine stalled, the car could no longer move. The kidnapper realized that he was trapped. He desperately needed help to get out of there and continue his escape. Without thinking twice, James grabbed the phone and pressed a few buttons, contacting his friend. Soon a van pulled up, from which a woman and 2 children got out. Together with Deborah and the baby, they got into this car and drove to a house at an unknown address. Apparently, it was the home of the very friend of James who had come to his aid. Entering the house, the kidnapper roughly threw Deborah and the child on the couch. He himself continued to walk excitedly from corner to corner, not letting go of the weapon and muttering something under his breath. It was clear that some new plan was ripening in his head. After some time, he approached Deborah and informed her that he was going to take his friend's car in order to continue his escape and still get to the airport. Then, taking advantage of a short pause in his unbalanced monologue, the woman quietly asked to go to the bathroom. James reluctantly agreed, but still ordered his friend to go with her and watched that she wouldn't do anything stupid. However, he did not go into the bathroom itself, remaining to wait at the door. Left alone, Deborah tried to escape through the window in the bathroom. However, her efforts were in vain, the window was too small to climb through. By that time, the woman who had picked them up at the railroad crossing had already managed to take her children and leave. She realized that the house might be filled with policemen at any moment and was afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. No one wanted to take risks, especially when young children were around. James continued to be nervous. He hastily shoved Deborah and the child into the car and sped off. The kidnapper trusted no one and suspected that the woman who had recently given them a ride might have turned him over to the cops. Behind the wheel, the young criminal was extremely tense. He convulsively smoked cigarette after cigarette to somehow calm his nerves and focus on the road. Suddenly the lighter failed. To buy a new one, James turned into the nearest gas station. Threatening Deborah with reprisals if she disobeyed, he left the woman waiting in the car, and he went to the store himself. Going inside, the kidnapper got caught on surveillance cameras for the first time since the beginning of the escape. The security guards immediately noticed the suspicious buyer. But they did not even suspect how dangerous this unknown young man was to them. At that moment, an emergency message sounded in the store. It was an urgent police appeal with a description and photograph of the wanted criminal. Law enforcement officials warned residents about the abduction of a woman named Deborah and her infant son. In addition, the announcer reported that Amanda, the suspect's ex-girlfriend, had been attacked and died from a fatal gunshot wound to the chest without regaining consciousness. James, although he was directly to blame for her death, seemed genuinely shocked and saddened by the news of the girl's untimely death. Stunned by what he heard, he returned to the car, but refused to go anywhere further. The young man froze in place, trying to understand what to do next. Pondering his options, James muttered something under his breath until he shared his gruesome plan with Deborah. He reported that he had only 5 rounds left. One was intended for the boy, one for the hostage, and James was going to save the remaining 3 bullets for a clash with the police. The criminal was sure that this would be enough to deal with the cops and take possession of their weapons. Such a backup plan for an extreme case. If that didn't work either, he had 1 spare round left for himself. The kidnapper found himself in an extremely difficult situation. It seemed that he was not going to surrender alive in order to rot behind bars for the rest of his life. So he was ready to risk everything for the slightest chance of escape or, in case of failure, take his own life. Having announced his sinister plan, James started the engine and drove off. Hearing the kidnapper's overt threats, Deborah became even more alarmed, realizing the reality of the danger looming over her and the child. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the gas station where the criminal had recently stopped, but it was too late, the car with the hostages had disappeared again. Now the FBI joined the operation. Law enforcement officers managed to determine the approximate direction of the fugitives' movement, but they had a head start of several hours. In order to catch James, cops from all the surrounding towns and even neighboring states joined the massive manhunt. The case took on federal significance. However, no success was achieved. Deborah and the boy still remained captives of a mad criminal who was becoming more and more unpredictable and dangerous with every minute. The police did not stop surveillance. The car of James' accomplice, in which the fugitives were traveling, was caught again on surveillance cameras, this time at another gas station 200 miles from the previous one. The kidnapper again forced the hostages to wait in the cabin, threatening reprisals if Deborah dared to call for help. Despite the mortal risk, the woman was desperate and wanted to inform outsiders about her abduction in any way possible. She just had no idea where she was. Deborah only understood that she was very far from home. So it was unlikely that random witnesses in these parts had heard anything about the kidnapping and murder that had taken place hundreds of miles from there. Weighing all the pros and cons, the hostage decided not to take risks and not attract unnecessary attention to herself. She placed all her hopes on the professionalism of the police, hoping that she and the boy would finally be able to get out of this nightmare alive. While Deborah was desperately looking for a way out of the predicament, James, as if mocking her, decided to arrange a little snack for himself. He leisurely enjoyed his beer, smoked freshly purchased and finally even used the restroom. Returning to the car, the kidnapper allowed Deborah to relieve herself as well. True, the half-dressed woman in a summer dress could arouse unwanted suspicion. Therefore, James took pity and gave her a jacket and sneakers. As it turned out, very timely, after all, they had been on the road for many hours. While the hostage went to the restroom, the criminal did not take his crazy eyes off her, suspecting the woman of any attempt at disobedience. So Deborah never dared to ask outsiders for help, knowing that the furious James was watching her every step. As soon as the captive returned, the kidnapper abruptly jerked her into the cabin and slammed the gas pedal to the floor. A wild chase began. The police finally got on the trail of the missing car. The gas station workers, where a young man similar to the suspect's description had recently stopped, recognized him and immediately called the police. James, sensing the pursuit, finally lost his mind. He drove like crazy, constantly looking around and mumbling something under his breath. At one point, Deborah tried to move to the back seat next to the boy to shield him with her body in case of a shootout. But James angrily forbade her to do so, threatening with a gun. Instead, after a few miles, he suddenly braked, snatched the baby out of the car seat, and roughly sat him on his lap in the front. Soon the fugitive's car, racing through the outskirts, was surrounded by police cars and officers with weapons at the ready. This happened in Fulton County, Indiana. Despite all his bravado and arrogant threats, James did not dare open fire at the crucial moment, neither at the hostages, nor at the cops, not even for his own suicide. Instead, he silently handed the child over to the officers and allowed himself to be arrested. Finally, the terrible ordeals of Deborah and the baby came to an end. The liberation was so unexpected and long awaited that the woman could not even cry with relief. Due to nervous overstrain, she simply fainted in the arms of a policeman. Meanwhile, the sad news of Amanda's death shook the entire community. Hundreds of people came to the funeral of the 23-year-old girl to honor her bright memory. Amanda's ashes were cremated by the decision of her relatives. The investigation into the brutal kidnapping and murder continued. It turned out that the reason for James' inappropriate behavior was banal jealousy. On the morning of that fateful day, he saw on social networks that his ex had changed her relationship status. This news drove him crazy. Even earlier, James had threatened to deal with the girl, but she did not take these intimidations seriously. As it turned out, in vain. The kidnapper did not waste time. He immediately armed himself and went to Amanda's father's house with the intention of catching the girl in bed with her new lover. But Curtis was no longer there at that moment, so the bullet found only Amanda. If the young man had been in the room, he would have met the same sad fate. 27-year-old James was charged with premeditated murder, unlawful abduction of 2 persons, and a host of other crimes. In the end, the defendant pleaded guilty on all counts and was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole only after 27 years. Later, Deborah admitted that she was extremely surprised to learn that the mortally wounded Amanda had survived until the arrival of the paramedics. And that it was the girl who managed to tell the cops important information about the abduction of the child and stepmother, and named the name of her offender. This information became crucial and helped save 2 innocent lives from the villain. Since then, Deborah has considered herself the lifelong debtor of the deceased girl, because it was only thanks to Amanda's courage that she and the boy remained alive. The woman took responsibility for the further upbringing of the baby, so that he would grow up in the circle of loved ones, loving father, grandfather and grandmother. And still, every evening they gratefully remember Amanda, the guardian angel of their small family. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.